If you want, you can turn to Philippians chapter 4. We will spend most of our time there together, and any of our other texts will be on the screen. So Philippians chapter 4. Before we begin the sermon portion for tonight, I wanted to make mention of Teen Sing for this coming year. The sign-up sheet for hosting Teen Sing is in the back. There's still a few slots open. I'm not trying to pressure you into signing up. That's not my goal right here. But I did want to tell you a little bit about what it is, because I know we have some people who are new, some people who haven't ever hosted before. So I wanted to explain in just 30 seconds what Teen Sing is. Basically, typically what it is if you host, you provide food. Thank you for that. And then we go and I bring the teens to your place, or Wendell brings the teens, whichever one. I'm always there, but sometimes Wendell also brings the teens. And the teens come, and we come and eat your food, and we sing in your house, worship hymns. And it's a great time. We really love it. It's really, that's all it is. We we have teens and we sing. I guess we should call it, Teen Sing Eat, something like that. But it also involves food. But that's all it is. It's really basic, and it's a good time. I think everybody who hosts has a great time. The teens really appreciate getting into people's houses and getting to know people. So, just for your information, that's what it is. It happens on Sunday evenings, usually about once a month we do it. To go to someone's house after evening worship and have Teen Sing. So that's what it is. And if you would like to host and you have questions, just feel free to always, talk to me. We can figure out if it's right for you, if you want to do it, that kind of thing. All right, for tonight, we're talking about contentment. We talked about this once before Christmas Day, when a lot of people exchange gifts, and we're concluding our little two-part series here in the new year. I think it's also really appropriate now as we think about our new life, post-holidays. A lot of people experience post-holiday blues. So if you are there, I think this will also be helpful for you. And also in this new year, as we think about what are we reaching for? A lot of us have goals. A lot of us have resolutions that we're reaching for in this new year. And I think contentment has an important message for us. So Philippians chapter 4. I heard this week as I was studying for this and thinking on it, the phrase that the secret to happiness, the secret to contentment, is to be happy with what you already have. It's an interesting concept to me, and I think it's powerful in a lot of ways, that the secret to happiness is being content with what you already have. This is something that is not new. There's a C.S. Lewis character in the Shadowlands that says, I don't want to be somewhere else anymore. I'm not waiting for anything new to happen. I'm not looking around the next corner or over the next hill. I'm here now, and that's enough. Now those two sentences are challenging for me. There's a lot packed in there. The perspective of I'm not looking around the next corner. I'm not reaching for the next achievement. I'm content with where I am right now. But also in the 17th century, Jeremiah Burroughs wrote that a Christian comes to contentment not so much by way of addition as by way of subtraction. Now, if you're like me, you hear math, you shut down. So let me explain that in different words. That he's saying that we don't come to contentment by adding on to what we already have. That's not how we achieve happiness, at least according to Jeremiah Burroughs, not the Bible Jeremiah. We don't achieve it by adding things on to what we already have. We actually achieve it by subtracting from our desires to meet the situation in which God has placed us in our lives. That we don't achieve happiness or contentment, these are related concepts, by reaching for more things. We achieve it by realizing that we already have enough. Now this is a more nuanced concept than that, but I think that's a good place to start for our thoughts of contentment. Because just that is challenging, right? We have this voice in our heads, and for the title of tonight, we're calling it Contentment in a Season of Consumerism. Consumerism is, maybe you've heard it as covetousness, right? That's the Old Testament, King James especially, like Bible word for this, that we covet more and more things. Consumerism is the idea that more is better, that I'll be happy the more stuff that I have. And in a lot of ways, I think Paul would look at our culture and he would say that we are a consumeristic culture, that we are a covetous culture, that we want more and more things because we've bought into the story that the more things that we have, the happier we will be. So to us, I think Paul has some challenges here in the book of Philippians, because we have this voice in our heads. At least for me, I think I've imbibed this voice in a lot of ways from our culture. This voice that if you have that car, you'll be happier, right? If you buy that new house, you get to lounge out, I don't know, in your own backyard beside a beautiful pool, you'd be way happier than you are now. Or if you made twice as much as you do right now, you just double your income. Then you can take all the vacations that you want. You'd be happier, right? We have that voice in our heads. But I think to that voice of consumerism, God also adds his voice to the mix. And it says some things that agree in some ways with that voice. But that's always how the devil's lies get to us, right? Because there's some truth in a lot of what he says. But I think there's important nuances to how God would change that and challenge us. So, first of all, we talked about how celebration is greater than cynicism. Celebration is greater than cynicism. Now, this is not, like we talked about last time, this is not a naive or sentimental or happy-go-lucky attitude just for the sake of positivity. It's more about having a mature and reasoned worldview that reaches that point because we truly believe, like in faith, that God is doing something with the world. So when we look out and we watch the news and we hear the brokenness, the darkness that affects so much of our reality, we see that and we don't negate it, we don't ignore it, but we say that that's not the final word, that God is doing something with our world. He's redeeming us. There's something going on in God's grand story that we are involved in. So that's why we can choose to celebrate rather than being cynical. When you call someone a cynic, typically, you're saying that they're bitter, they're negative, they're resentful, they're just a Grinch, right? That's typically what a cynic is. But the original cynics, back in ancient Greece, it was a philosophical school, the Cynics. And their main thing was not so much pointing out the negativity in life, it was actually searching for the virtue in the world. This guy named Diogenes was one of the original leaders of the Cynics. And he would walk around in Athens at high noon with a lamp in his hand, a lit lamp. And he'd just walk around the streets of Athens in broad daylight. And people would come up to him, obviously, and ask him, what are you doing? Have you lost your mind? What's going on? And he would respond and say that he was looking for virtue. That was his purpose in at least his philosophical thought, was looking for virtue in the world. And maybe you wouldn't do that looking with a lamp in broad daylight, but you get the point that he was trying to get across, that he's searching for what's virtuous in the world. So that's maybe that original cynicism is something that we are called toward, looking for what's virtuous. Like Paul says here in verse 8 of Philippians 4, that we're looking for what's lovely, for what's just, for what's praiseworthy. He says, think on these things. And he says in verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I'll say, just in case you missed it the first time, rejoice. So we're choosing celebration over negative cynicism. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and we started with this last time, and we'll continue with this thought tonight, is that presence is greater than presence. Presence, the act of being here, is better than presence, which is just stuff that you get. So we started with this thought, and we talked about it from Philippians 4. But tonight, I want to begin in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5. And like I said, this text will be on the screen, but please feel free to turn to it in your own Bible. Hebrews 13 and verse 5 says, keep your life free from love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, this is really interesting to me, that he connects the love of money, right? The love of money and the stuff that you already have, connects that directly to, and being content with that, directly to the fact that God is with us. There's some connection here for the Hebrews preacher between the stuff that we already have, the love of money, needing more of that, being content with what we have, and God being with us. There's some connection here. So when consumerism or discontentment or the devil has this voice in our heads that says, your current job is, it's okay, but you'd be happier with one that gives you more recognition. I think God says in return, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. And when that voice in our heads says, your car does fine, but how much cooler would you look if you were in a Tesla Cybertruck, right? A lot of you would hate that. But how much better would you feel about yourself if you were driving around in a car that costs, I don't know, triple what yours does right now? I think to that desire, God's voice says, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. And then when you're looking around, whether in real life or on social media, and you see these, or I don't know, TV commercials, you see these perfect families, right? These beautiful families that are happy and they all like being around each other and they're all kind to each other. You see that and you think, why can't I have a husband like that? Or why can't I have kids like that? Kids that smile when I walk in the room, right? Why can't I have that? I think to that voice, God responds and he says, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. That this voice of God is coming to combat the consumerism, in a sense, the discontentment, the devil's voice in our heads. And I think the question for me and for you, and I mean for me, this is starting with me, is which voice do I listen to, right? In those moments, and those moments, at least for me, happen frequently. Which voice do I listen to in those moments? Do I listen to the voice of God or to the voice of the devil, the voice of discontentment? And I think it's important to say that in some ways, this whole conversation is a slippery slope, because having a new job or a new car or a new house or a new church or getting married or having children, those are not problems, right? Like those are, in general, those are probably good things. But the issue is the internal restlessness that has me going from one hill to another, right? Where I climb this hill. I climb the hill of a prestigious career. I get to the top, and I presume the whole time that when I get there, I'm finally going to feel happy. I'm going to feel content. Then I realize, well, okay, I'm going to climb this next hill of a beautiful wife. And I climb this hill, and then you get there, and, it's just, you feel the same as you did at the bottom of the hill. You feel the same as you did at the top of the last hill and before you climb that first one. Then you climb the next hill and the next one. Because there's this voice, and this whole time you're searching for the answer to this internal restlessness, this internal call that something is missing. And I think to that, God offers his voice for us. He comes into our lives, and he offers himself as the end of our chase. That he is the cosmic period that concludes the search for me. And I think he invites us not only, like we began with, to be happy with what we already have, but also to be happy with whom we already have. Because he offers us himself. In Hebrews 13 and verse 5, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you. Therefore, you can be content. Therefore, you don't have to love money and everything that comes along with it, because you have me. In John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman and Jesus are at the well together, and she's gone to draw this water from the well, right? And Jesus does what he does, and he speaks in these confusing riddles, and he says to her, everyone who drinks of this water, of this literal physical water, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So Jesus offers us this promise that the water that she's drawing out of this well, and in the story, this symbolizes the stuff of this world. Not only material things, but the promises that this world has to offer. That all of that is eventually going to run out. That's how we work, right? We get something and we get used to it. And you're probably, I don't know, if you got Christmas gifts, you've probably been using them. And to some extent, the first time you, eat that first bite of ice cream, it's fantastic, right? But then by the sixth bite, it's still good. It's still ice cream, but it's not like that first bite, right? That's how we work. And that's true of really everything in life. But Jesus says that he offers this water that doesn't ever give up, that it quenches our thirst in a way that we never need anything else again. I think for Jesus, what he's saying is that he himself is this spiritual water, that living in communion with him, being united with our Creator, with our Redeemer, is spiritual water that quenches our spiritual, emotional life thirst. So the only search that remains for us is to go deeper into union with him, to realize more and more just how within us he is. That as Dennis was talking about this morning from Ephesians chapter 4, that there's one God, one Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. That he is within us, that he's all around us, and that we want to go deeper into communion with him. That presence, the presence of God with us, is better. I don't know, it might be cheesy, but I think it's memorable for me. It's better than any kind of present that we really can get in this world. That the stuff of this world is never as fulfilling as the spiritual life, the living water that Jesus has to offer. So that's the second thought, that presence is greater than presence. And the third thought for our thoughts on contentment is that Christ is greater than circumstances. And this is similar, but taking it a little bit of a different direction. Christ is greater than circumstances. So let's read in Philippians chapter 4, in verse 11. This is Paul, and he says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned, in whatever situation I am, to be content." Now notice what he says. He says, "I have learned to be content." So this is not built in, even for this apostle, right? This is not built in. He didn't get a heavenly spiritual chip implanted into his brain that suddenly made him into this perfect person with full contentment, right? He says, I've learned this. It wasn't easy. It wasn't instant. It happened over the course of years. And if you remember, he's writing this from prison. And Roman prisons, I definitely would not want to be in our prisons, but Roman prisons were significantly worse in terms of quality of life and how much they cared about whether you survived. They were not good places to be. And Paul's in this prison, and he says, I've learned to be content in whatever situation I am in. So notice that this is a gradual process. It's not easy. It's not instant. It's not going to happen just from me preaching 2 sermons, right? I'm not going to all of a sudden be perfectly content, and neither are you. It doesn't happen like that. And it also, for Paul, is not just a casual, let's leave it up to God approach, right? He doesn't just let go and let God and ignore the problems of our world. He doesn't just paper over the cracks of his life. Instead, what he's learned has come to him over the course of steady schoolwork over years, right? This homework from God, this life that God has given him, has taught him this. He's learned this in the school of hard knocks. And he says in verse 12 that he's learned a secret. That's what all that homework has gotten him to understand. He says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. So notice he depicts here the roller coaster of life, right? I'm personally not a roller coaster guy. I don't enjoy them. I want to be off of them the second I get on them. But the thing is, we all face roller coasters in life, right? I also don't like that roller coaster, to be honest. Instead of going from like a 10 on the happiness level to a 4 over the course of a month, or just going up and down, I'd like 7.5, right? I'm fine right there. Maybe you are too. But that's not how life works. We go up and down. We have, as Paul says here, we are brought low. We abound. So he goes on this roller coaster of life. But in all of the starvation and abundance and rocking and rolling and tumbling and ups and downs that he's experiencing, he tells us that he's managed to learn this secret that he's passing on indirectly to us. It's a secret to contentment. Now, Paul is not unique amongst the thinkers of his day in talking about contentment. Plenty of philosophers of his world spoke of contentment, but they usually spoke of contentment in terms of self-sufficiency. The way they thought of contentment was you dig down deep, right? You look within yourself and you find the resources to get past, to smile during the roller coasters of life. You look in yourself. But for Paul, he actually looks in a different place. And this, I think, is his secret. I think this is what he's getting at. The secret of contentment for Paul is verse 13. It's this famous verse. He says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now this verse, you've probably heard it used to mean many things in our world, right? Especially in terms of sports. I can get this verse down because I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Or I can pass this test because I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Maybe there's some truth in some of that. I really don't know. But that's not what Paul is getting at here, the main thing at least. For him, this is about his secret. Or this is his secret. It's not about self-sufficiency. The source of his contentment is not from within himself, digging down deep, gritting your teeth and buckling down and bearing it, right? That's not the source of the secret for Paul. For him, it comes from the outside. For him, he says that Christ is greater than any and every circumstance. That Christ without me, Christ outside of me, is what gets me through life. So, this is where years of this steady schoolwork for Paul has taken him. It's taken him to the God that he had come to know in Jesus the Christ. And this is interesting because in some ways, this is exactly the type of sermon that you would expect to hear in a church building, right? Because the whole thing is pointing you to Jesus. The answer is Jesus. The answer is Jesus. That's where this whole thing is going. But in another way, I think for Paul, in some ways, and I think should be for us, this is surprising that in his life, with all the ups and downs that he'd experienced, all the topsy-turviness of this life that we all experience, in the end, what it led him to was a relationship with this person, was being in union with Jesus himself. And that as he found that Christ within him, Christ empowering him, was a secret to his contentment, that he could get through anything, no matter what happened to him in life, because of this relationship with Jesus. So that's a secret. And I think it's interesting that it's not a saute, right? It's a slow burn. It's not self-help. It's Christ in me. And it's not consumerism. It's not that the next Amazon purchase that I make will bring me happiness. It's contentment. It's being okay with my life, not because I can dig within myself to find the resources needed, but because Christ within me is empowering me to this contentment. And I think that this secret that Paul speaks of is available for anyone and everyone who's willing to go through the same school that he went through, the school of hard knocks, and to accept the lessons that it teaches us. That the more that I climb the next hill, the more that I dig within myself, the more I find unhappiness, the more I find discontentment, the more I find that I'm still missing what I've been looking for all along. And this isn't true, by the way, just about material things. I've been thinking about this for myself. I typically, when I think about time in my life, I typically think of myself as being time impoverished. I feel that I never have enough time. But I think contentment would point us also toward time affluence, that I actually am wealthy in time if I'm content with the time that I've been given. So contentment has to do with time. It has to do with my lot in life. It has to do with my marriage, with my kids, with my job. That, of course, if you are in an unhealthy or even abusive situation, that's a separate matter, right? But the general life that I struggle with, Paul calls me to this secret. He calls me to give up on trying to make myself happy and instead to let Christ empower me to be content. Now, I want to close with two texts from the rest of the Bible, one from Ecclesiastes and one from the book of 1 Timothy. So first, Ecclesiastes chapter 4. I really wanted to read these about contentment because they've been challenging me, so I wanted to share them with you. They just really didn't work in a specific point in the rest of the sermon. So I want to leave you with these two texts. This is from the preacher or the professor of Ecclesiastes. He says, "Again, I saw vanity under the sun. I saw, in other words, something that's empty. It doesn't really make sense. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, 'For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?' This also is vanity and an unhappy business." This man that the Ecclesiastes professor describes, we might call a workaholic. He is not as concerned with the people in his life, and in fact, he says he really doesn't have people in his life, because he's so focused on achievement. He's so focused on ambition. He's so focused on what he thinks of as success, that he moves from one project to the next, from one paycheck to the next, always searching, and he says, never finding. He says it's vanity, it's an unhappy business. So, Ecclesiastes, and then 1 Timothy chapter 6. Beginning in verse 6, it says, "Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction." And then he says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. As for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of what is truly life. Now notice that he's not saying that it is a sin to be wealthy, right? That's not what he says. He does warn against the dangers of being wealthy. He says it's, if we could put it like this, it's a road full of potholes. And also we should say that in terms of being wealthy in this present age, probably everyone in here would be included in that boat, right? Like we're all there. So this is for us. And for us, he doesn't tell us just to, empty our bank accounts. He doesn't tell us to do that right away. That's what Jesus tells the rich young ruler. So for some of us, we might need to. But Paul doesn't say that here. And instead, he calls for us to change our perspective. And really, he calls for us to change what we have our faith in, right? He says, don't set your hope on the uncertainty of riches. Don't run your life based on your bank account, but run it based on good deeds. Run it based on giving to the people around you, to be generous, and change your perspective about what really is treasure, what really actually is valuable in life. Because the money that I make, I might think of that as treasure, but he depicts it at least as less valuable than what he says, the treasure for themselves, a good foundation for the future, the good deeds, the treasure in heaven that Jesus speaks about, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. Now this, I think, is a great place to end. To take hold of what is truly life. I think this is the message from Jesus, the message from Paul. It brings us right back to that person, to Jesus. He says, if you drink of this living water, you'll never be thirsty again. Paul says, if you take hold of what's really, truly life, you can learn my secret, that it is in Christ that I have contentment. It's within him that the voice in my head of consumerism, of the idolatry of stuff, is quieted. And I can listen to God when he says, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. So, if you're like me and you need to hear those words, I hope they've been a blessing to your life. And tonight, we want to offer you an invitation that if you want to dedicate or to rededicate your life to Christ, if you want to follow after him and live life his way, as he is King of my life, King of the universe, King of your life, if you want to do that, why don't you do it as we stand and sing together.